At 62, after 21 years as a single mom, I sat at my own dining table and realized the boy I raised saw me as nothing more than a bank account. That Tuesday evening started quietly. I spent the afternoon roasting a chicken with rosemary and potatoes the exact way my son David always loved it. The house smelled warm and familiar. Outside, the autumn leaves drifted across my front lawn, settling onto the porch of the home my late husband and I had worked 3 decades to pay off. David and his wife Sarah arrived right at 6. Sarah immediately began rearranging the coasters on my coffee table, a small habit she had of marking her territory whenever she stepped into my house. We moved to the dining room, sharing small talk about David's commute and Sarah's upcoming office party. When I brought out the coffee and sliced a homemade pound cake, I took a deep breath. I wanted to share my joy. I have some wonderful news. I began looking between them. Arthur and I are getting married. The room went entirely silent. Not a joyful silence. It was the heavy, calculating kind. Sarah slowly put down her fork, glancing sideways at her husband. David cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair. He didn't offer a smile. He didn't ask when the wedding would be. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest. "That's fine, Mom," David replied, his voice completely flat. "But before the wedding transfer, the house your accounts and your investments to us." I stared at him for a few seconds. The sheer audacity of his demand hung in the air thick and suffocating. 21 years of working double shifts, skipping my own vacations to pay for his college and helping him with his first down payment, all reduced to a cold business transaction. Before I could even form a response, my doorbell rang. The sharp chime broke the tension. I stood up, slowly smoothing my apron, and walked to the front door. Standing on my porch was Gary, the local locksmith. He held a heavy toolbox and offered a polite nod. "Evening, Helen. Sorry, I'm a bit late." Gary apologized, wiping his boots on the mat. "Got held up on another job. Ready to swap out these deadbolts. Right on time, Gary." I smiled, stepping aside to let him in. David and Sarah had followed me into the hallway. Sarah frowned, crossing her arms. "What is going on? Why is there a locksmith here at 7 in the evening?" I didn't owe her an explanation, but I gave her a simple truth. "I'm updating the security around the house. For months, Sarah had been using her spare key to drop in unannounced. I would come home from grocery shopping to find my pantry reorganized or my late husband's vintage tools missing from the garage because David needed to borrow them. Indefinitely. Gary worked quickly, the sound of his drill echoing in the quiet house. Within 20 minutes, he replaced the front and back door locks, handing me a pair of shiny new silver keys. I paid him in cash and thanked him. Once the door clicked shut behind him, Sarah held out her hand, expecting the usual routine. "Well, go ahead and give David the new spare. We need access for emergencies." I looked at her outstretched hand, then down at the keys. I calmly dropped them into my deep apron pocket. "No," I replied smoothly. "You won't be needing a key anymore. If there is an emergency, you can knock." David's face turned bright red. "Mom, you can't be serious. This is my childhood home. It is my home, David." I corrected him, keeping my voice steady. "And the locks stay with me." Dinner ended shortly after that. Nobody touched the rest of the pound cake. Sarah grabbed her purse in a huff, whispering sharply to David as they marched out the front door. I locked the new deadbolt behind them, listening to the satisfying, heavy click. The house felt empty, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel lonely. It felt entirely mine. I walked into the kitchen, wrapped the leftover chicken, and washed the dishes. My hands moved steadily in the warm, soapy water. I wasn't going to cry. I had done my crying 20 years ago when I had to figure out how to raise a teenager on a single income. Drying my hands, I walked into the study and opened my laptop. I logged into my banking portal. For years, I had allowed certain auto drafts to pull from my checking account. It started when David was in college and just never stopped. $120 a month for his and Sarah's cell phone plan. $150 for their car insurance. It was just easier to keep paying it than to listen to them complain about money being tight, especially when they always seemed to have enough for weekend getaways. Transfer everything to us, I whispered to myself, remembering his cold demand. I clicked on the recurring payments tab. Cancel, autopay, confirm. Cancel, autopay, confirm. In less than 3 minutes, I severed the financial pipeline. I didn't send a warning text. I didn't write a long emotional email explaining my feelings. They wanted me to secure my finances before my marriage to Arthur, and I was doing exactly that. I closed the laptop, turned off the study light, and went to bed, feeling lighter than I had in a decade. Tomorrow, their payments would bounce. The next morning, I sat on my back patio with a hot cup of black tea, watching the robins gather near the bird feeder. The autumn air was crisp, biting slightly at my cheeks. At exactly 9:15 a.m., my cell phone started buzzing on the glass table. David's name flashed on the screen. I took another slow sip of tea before answering. "Hello, David." "Mom, what did you do?" His voice was frantic, lacking any of the cold authority he had tried to project the night before. "My car insurance just sent a cancellation warning and Sarah got a text from the phone carrier. The payments declined." "They didn't decline," I answered mildly. "I canceled the recurring drafts. You'll need to set them up with your own debit card." Without telling us, David raised his voice. "Sarah is furious. You can't just cut us off because you're mad about last night." I set my mug down. "I am not mad, David. But you reminded me yesterday that I need to be responsible with my assets before I remarry. Paying the bills for a 30-year-old married man is not responsible." I could hear Sarah muttering something sharply in the background. David's tone shifted, trying to sound reasonable. "Look, Mom, we just want to protect you. Arthur doesn't have a house like yours. What if he takes advantage of you? Arthur has a steady pension and treats me with respect," I countered. "He has never once asked me for a dime. I cannot say the same for you." "Fine," David snapped. "If you want to act like this, don't expect Sarah to drop the kids off this weekend. We aren't your free entertainment." They had always treated me as a free babysitter, assuming I had nothing better to do. "That works perfectly," I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Arthur and I are going antique shopping anyway." I hung up. By Thursday, the silence from David and Sarah was deafening. They clearly expected me to call them back and beg to see my grandchildren while reinstating their phone plan. Instead, I put on my old gardening jeans and walked into the garage. For 6 years, my 2-car garage had only fit 1 car. The other half was a mountain of David and Sarah's belongings. Cardboard boxes of college textbooks, an ugly velvet armchair Sarah hated but refused to throw away, and a broken jet ski David bought on a whim and never repaired. They used my home as their personal rent-free storage unit. Around noon, Arthur pulled into the driveway in his reliable old Ford pickup. He stepped out, handing me a fresh iced coffee. "Ready to do some heavy lifting?" "Helen." He grinned, rolling up his flannel sleeves. "More than ready." I nodded. We spent 3 hours hauling boxes, dragging the velvet chair, and pushing the heavy jet ski out onto the edge of my driveway. The physical labor felt incredibly satisfying. I was clearing out the clutter they had forced upon me, reclaiming my physical space inch by inch. When the garage was finally swept clean, I took a photo of the massive pile sitting on the concrete. I attached the image to a text message and sent it to David. "Your belongings are on the driveway. Please rent a truck and remove them by Sunday evening. Anything left on Monday morning goes to the charity donation center. I slipped the phone into my pocket, dusted off my hands, and looked at the empty half of my garage. It was spacious, clean, and ready for Arthur's woodworking bench. Less than an hour later, a familiar black SUV sped down my street. Sarah slammed the passenger door of the SUV before David even put it in park. She marched up my driveway, her face flushed with anger, pointing a manicured finger at the pile of boxes. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Sarah shouted, ignoring Arthur, who was quietly wiping down his hands with a rag near his truck. "You can't just leave our property out in the weather." I leaned against the garage frame, perfectly calm. "It's not raining, Sarah. You have until Sunday." David jogged up behind her, looking completely overwhelmed. "Mom, come on. We live in a townhouse. We don't have room for a jet ski or these boxes. You have plenty of space in there." "I did," I corrected him. "But Arthur is moving in soon and he needs space for his tools. My garage is not a public storage unit." Sarah stepped aggressively toward the door leading into my kitchen. "I am going inside to see what else of ours you're trying to throw away." I moved quickly, stepping directly into the doorway, blocking her path. I didn't raise my hands, but my posture was rigid, an immovable wall. "You do not live here," I stated, staring directly into her wide, shocked eyes. "You do not have a key, and you are not welcome inside today." Sarah gasped, stepping back as if I had slapped her. She had spent years bullying me, assuming my quiet nature meant I was weak. "You are choosing a man over your own family," David muttered, shaking his head. "I am choosing myself, David. Take your things." I stepped back and pulled the heavy garage door down, the metal rattling shut, leaving them standing on the concrete with their junk. They didn't leave immediately. Through the kitchen window, I watched David frantically calling a rental truck company while Sarah paced the driveway, typing furiously on her phone. Arthur walked into the kitchen, washing his hands at the sink. "You held up well," he offered, quietly drying his hands on a towel. "I should have done this a decade ago." I admitted, pouring us both a glass of water. An hour later, a small rented box truck arrived. As they loaded the heavy jet ski and the dusty boxes, I stepped out onto the porch to retrieve my mail. Sarah slammed the back door of the truck shut. She walked over to the bottom of the porch steps, her expression twisted into a bitter sneer. "I hope this empty house keeps you warm, Helen," Sarah sneered. "Because if you continue this behavior, you will not see Leo or Emma again. We won't subject our children to a grandmother who kicks her own family to the curb." The threat hit exactly where she intended. A sharp ache bloomed in my chest. I adored my grandchildren. But I also recognized a hostage situation when I saw one. For years, she had dangled those kids over my head to get her way-free babysitting loans. They never repaid holidays hosted perfectly to her standards. I looked down at her from the porch. "As a mother, you have the right to decide who your children see," I answered firmly, refusing to let my voice shake. "But you will not use my grandchildren as a currency to buy my submission. My house, my finances, and my choices belong to me." David looked away, unable to meet my eyes. They climbed into their vehicles and drove away, leaving my driveway completely empty. 6 weeks later, the late November air was unusually mild and golden. Arthur and I didn't want a grand church wedding. We chose a simple ceremony in his expansive flower-lined backyard. A small white arch was decorated with ivy, and 30 of our closest friends sat in wooden folding chairs, chatting softly as a cellist played in the corner. I wore a simple, elegant ivory dress. Looking in the mirror before walking out, I didn't see the tired, anxious widow who had spent 2 decades walking on eggshells. I saw a woman who finally owned her own life. There were 2 empty chairs in the second row. David and Sarah had received an invitation. They never RSVP'd. I knew deep down they believed I would cave before the wedding. They thought the threat of losing my grandchildren would break me, forcing me to hand over the house deeds and bank accounts just to secure their presence today. A brief wave of grief washed over me, a mourning for the son I thought I had raised. But as I stepped out the back door and saw Arthur waiting for me, his eyes crinkling in a warm, genuine smile, the grief dissolved into pure peace. We exchanged vows under the afternoon sun. No drama, no tension, no one checking their watch or complaining about the catering. When Arthur placed the ring on my finger, I felt entirely present. After the reception, we returned to my house. Walking up the front steps, Arthur carried a small tray of leftover cake. I reached for my keys, noticing a pristine white envelope tucked neatly under the welcome mat. Inside the house, I set my purse down and sliced open the envelope. It was a card from David. Inside, there was no apology, no acknowledgement of his behavior. Just a few hastily scribbled words. Hope you're happy. We'll be here when you realize you need your real family. I read it twice. It was a classic manipulation tactic, framing himself as the victim waiting for me to fail. I walked straight to the kitchen and dropped the card into the trash can. Everything all right? Arthur asked, setting the cake in the fridge. Perfectly fine. I smiled. Over the next few months, my life transformed. Without the constant financial drain of David's bills and Sarah's emergency loans, I finally had disposable income. Arthur and I repainted the living room a bright, cheerful yellow, a color Sarah had always loudly despised. We replaced the heavy, dark curtains with light, airy linen. The house stopped feeling like a shrine to the past and became a home for our future. I joined a local gardening club. Arthur built his woodworking bench in the space where the broken jet ski used to sit. We took a week-long trip to the coast, paying in cash, not worrying for a single second about anyone else's approval. I missed my grandchildren. Yes. I sent them birthday gifts by mail, maintaining my boundary. I knew Sarah intercepted them, but I refused to play her game. I was no longer a resource to be managed. I was a person. I thought I had faced the worst of it. Until one rainy Tuesday in April, my phone rang. I was potting fresh geraniums on the back porch when I saw David's name on the screen. It had been 5 months since we last spoke. I wiped the soil from my hands and answered. Hello, David. Mom. His voice was soft, carrying the exact pitch he used when he was a teenager and had wrecked his bicycle. How have you been? I'm doing very well. The garden is coming in beautifully. How are the kids? They're good. Leo's playing soccer now. He paused, taking a ragged breath. Listen, Mom, we hit a massive snag. Our HVAC system completely died yesterday. The house is freezing, and the repair guy says it's a total replacement. $6,000. I leaned back against the wooden railing. I knew exactly how this script went. I was supposed to gasp, express deep worry, and immediately ask for his banking routing number. That sounds incredibly stressful, David, I offered with genuine sympathy. Replacing a furnace is never easy. Silence stretched over the line. He was waiting for the offer. When it didn't come, he forced the issue. We don't have the cash, Mom. Can you loan us the money? Just until tax season. 21 years of habit pulled at my chest, but the new foundation I had built held firm. I'm sorry, David, but I won't be doing that, I answered warmly without a trace of anger. Arthur and I have our own budget now. You and Sarah will need to look into a payment plan with the contractor. You're really going to let your grandkids freeze? He snapped, the sweetness dropping instantly. I am confident that 2 capable adults with good jobs will figure out how to heat their home, I replied smoothly. Take care of yourself, David. I ended the call. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel angry. I picked up my trowel, turned back to my bright red geraniums, and finally breathed free. Looking back, I've realized that for so long I confused loving my son with fixing all his problems. I thought sacrificing my own peace was just what being a good mother meant. But setting that final boundary wasn't about punishing him. It was about finally rescuing myself. It took me into my 60s to learn that true family doesn't demand you shrink your life just to make theirs easier. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for an adult child is to simply step back and let them carry the weight of their own choices. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to draw a hard line with family to protect your own peace, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments down below. You are definitely not alone in this. And if you enjoyed today's story, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like so we can keep growing this amazing community. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.